Well, welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name is Brandon. As always, I am joined by my business partner and good friend, Blaine Smith, where we are two friends, one question, half an hour, and zero script. And we have a great one. Tim has sent in a very potent question around leading with and without vision, or more plainly stated, what do you guys think about organizations establishing vision? You know, we hear all about this in the leadership dialogue. Got to have a big vision. You know, some people say you got to have a BHAG, you know, big, hairy, audacious goal. Shout out to Jim Collins. But what do you guys think about organizations leading with vision and organizations maybe even leading without, just kind of doing their thing? And when we talk about vision, how do you think about it both long range and more near term?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. And I'm a big fan of vision. I think it's one of those things that done well can make a huge difference, but done as a kind of a paper drill can be a bit of a distraction. So I think, like most things in the leadership practice, the intent with which we do it and the amount of rigor that we put into it ultimately makes the biggest difference. Because we've seen, more times than I can count, exercises around things like culture and values and all of that stuff. And again, done well, done intentionally, done with a lot of rigor, with the right people involved, it can be an absolute game changer for an organization. It can be something that really helps to keep a rudder in the water for that ship over the long term. But I think we see a lot of it done because we feel like we should. We feel like we have to, which is probably why Tim is asking this question. I'm sure he's like, I feel like we should, but I don't know that we do. And like, do we need to? And that's an important place to start. Maybe we initiate the conversation with, why do we think we need to have a vision? What is the value of having a vision? What will this do for our organization that's not currently being done right now? What's missing in our day-to-day or our kind of month-over-month effort where a clear vision would be helpful? I think if you're not answering those questions first, it's easy to get a little bit into the, just the exercise without really focusing on the intent. So I guess that's where I would start, as I would say, I think having a clear vision is really important. I think it gives people something to point to. It allows them to know what to be doing in a moment of, they're at a bit of fork in the road or something like that. It certainly can help with inspiration, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think you have to do it very intentionally. I think you have to understand what purpose it's serving for your organization. Take the time, put in the rigor, make sure the right folks are involved. And I think that is the place to start.
Yeah, I like the question that you're starting with here, as I'm hearing you, is what's missing? Like, what's missing right now in the manner in which we are functioning? And it leads me to the next question being, where are we trying to go? Shortly followed by, and where are we presently? And I think that just starting out this idea of vision, which, if we roll it back even further, when we say vision, we are talking about an aspirational picture of a greater future. We're talking about moving towards a better future than we are in right now. We have a clear vision. There's a statement that goes with it. There are reasons why. And what I hear you saying, Blaine, which is very common unless you're starting something tomorrow or today from the ground up and you're putting a whole business plan together and thinking about it, far more commonly, we have leaders who are operating businesses or departments or entities, whatever they're operating, and they're generally doing the work and most likely doing some good work. And maybe they can look at themselves in the mirror and say, have I really casted a vision for my team? And what are the downfalls of operating without one versus why is it a best practice to operate with one?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Almost everybody in business got started doing something. They may have had a really clear vision to start with. They may not have, but almost regardless, at some point we got busy doing the work and we felt like we needed to take a step back.
and think about it. And this is often coupled with, the mission and the values of an organization. We hear a lot vision, mission, values, or mission, vision, values. So they all kind of fit together and they're nested. I think the way I've often thought about it is that the vision is sort of rests a little higher than the mission. Like the mission is a very clear, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the vision is more, like you said, that aspirational picture of a potential better future. It's being able to communicate to our teammates and our stakeholders what it is we're hoping to achieve, not just for us, but for the people we serve and kind of for the world. It's a belief in what can be if we accomplish our mission. And so that's the way that I like to think about it. And I think that a very clear vision can do a lot of things for an organization. The first one I think is it generates an incredible amount of inspiration when done right. I think people can get behind a really clear and exciting vision. I think most people want to be a part of making the future a better place. And if you can let them know what exactly that will look like, my friend John Croft, Big Daddy back at GoRuck used to say, paint the yellow Pinto, like show them exactly what this thing looks like in
Hmm.
excruciating detail so that they can really understand it and hopefully they can see the role they'll play in helping to achieve that. And I think that can be very, very inspiring. We talk about inspiration as kind of the spark, it's the catalyst, it's the thing that gets someone, out of their seat or moving towards something, or maybe it gets them to join the organization. It's not necessarily enough to sustain them, but it's enough to get them interested, to get them moving, to get their interest pointed toward what you're trying to do. And so I think that is the biggest value that a vision can bring is just that inspiration. It's something that can really get people to aspire to be a part of something bigger than themselves, to ask a little more of themselves, to get on board for something that might take a long time or a lot of hard work to get there. And so, to the extent you can do that, I absolutely think you should.
Yeah. I mean, really, what you're talking about here is appealing to people's sense of greatness and inviting them into an opportunity to be the greatest that they can be in service of a greater vision for where or a greater destination than where we are today. Which I think, so much is shared about absenteeism, employee engagement, how engaged are people at work when they are at work. And to take the other side of this, I think often what happens when people are kind of just doing the moves and or just doing the work, they're just getting the tasks done. I think you will more likely get that when you operate without a vision. So part of the question was, talk about the difference between operating with one and without one. Operating with a vision, as you have just described, Blaine, gives people the sense to be invited into appealing to their greatest potential impact. That's super valuable. Operating without a vision might get people staring a little bit more at their feet than at the North Star, that's up on that ridge line. And I'm not saying that disparagingly, but I am saying that in the sense that I think it lends more to people kind of just meeting spec or meeting min standard. I think it leads more to people buying into whatever you want me to do as opposed to owning what we are trying to do. I think operating without a vision, when you have no clear sense of where we're going and how this is going to become a brighter future, I think that it really stymies initiative. I think it stymies people's willingness to bring their most creative solutions to the table, because what I think happens is that teammates just feel like, well, you just want me to do the thing and you want me to do it to standard and on time. And I'll just do the thing to standard and on time because I view myself as a cog in the wheel as opposed to a co author that owns a big piece of the equation to bring us to that greater future.
Yeah, I like the word ownership here, and I think this is actually fairly tricky as it relates to vision. Um, because it's one thing to get people to see your vision and to appreciate it. It is a very different thing to get them to really own it and feel like they're plank holders. They've got a real stake in it. And typically we would say if we want people to own things, we need to let them know that they belong. We need to include them in what's going on. And that is a great way to help, place some responsibility on them so that they can feel that sense of ownership. But in many cases, a leader, a CEO, or a leadership team, it might be a relatively small group of people that have this vision and want to cast it or share it with everybody else. And so, to some extent, in many cases, when it comes to vision, we're going to be asking people to sort of see our vision and to believe in it and to really want to move toward it. And so, how do we do that? And I think we often feel like it's got to be so beautifully articulated and such an inspiring vision that they can't help but get swept up in it. And I think that's a massive failure on the part of a lot of founders and a lot
Mm,
of CEOs is they
hmm.
presume that everybody cares as much about the business as they do, which is almost never true. I've worked for a couple of founders in my day, and I've cared an awful lot about the organizations that I was leading, but I've no one cared more about it or felt more invested in it than the founder. And it's not really realistic to think that anybody will. And so, how do we get people to really feel like they own the vision if we can? And I would say the first step would be help people understand what it means for them to get there and what role they will play in helping all of us get there. So I guess that's two things. What does this mean for you when we get there? What will it be like for you when this vision is achieved? And what critical role do you play in the ultimate achievement of that vision? I think then people can feel a heightened sense of ownership because it becomes very personal to them. But I don't think it's realistic to assume that anyone who ever works for you will feel as much
Yeah.
commitment to the company as you do, especially if you're a founder. The incentives just are not aligned that way. And I don't think that it's a good place to operate from.
Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about the fruits of vision. And we talk a lot about this where we might suggest that the fruit of a very clear vision, an aspirational, vision of a better future is inspiration. People will feel inspired, and we want people to feel generally inspired.
Yeah.
And I can't help myself from tacking that on to two other words that we talk about frequently and that we actually have a module around. And the two other words being motivation and effort. Because I think what we have seen and what we have shared with others is that you can have inspiration without motivation, and you can have motivation without effort. But in order to achieve the goals or the mission that you have set out for, in fact, the vision that you're trying to get to, you have to have inspiration, motivation, and effort. And in order to inspire others, to give them that vision, that is on us. That I think that's 100% on us as leaders to paint that. The next part, though, is that 50-50 proposition, which is motivation. Just because you're inspired doesn't mean you're motivated to actually do anything about it. And you and I share this example. Like, I find Alex Honnold completely inspiring. The free solo of El Cap, completely inspiring. I have no interest. I am completely unmotivated to do that. It's not motivating to me, even though it is inspiring. And what I think we would suggest here is that the motivation proposition is when we have inspired others, we've painted that vision of a greater future. The next thing we need to do is help people see themselves in that picture of a greater future, which is the motivation part. And that's a 50-50 proposition. And I think this addresses, in a very concrete way, what you just said about, founders. Like, we've worked for founders, they can have all the inspiration, and it's great, and I think that it is all well intended. I mean, as two founders now, I think we would suggest that it is very well intended. There's nothing nefarious about it, and It's up to us to help other people see themselves within this vision of a greater future. And that is this kind of this partnership here of here's the role, here's the goal that we need you to hit, and here's the rewards that we're going to give you. But it's also, when we talk about those people really owning it, those people have to bring the capabilities to the table. They have to bring their wants and their needs to the table. And when we can align that, then they have the effort. The effort is gangbusters. You'll go do, you'll run hard, you'll flex your initiative, you'll be willing to make mistakes and learn from them and all that kind of stuff. But I think far too often what we miss and what then becomes what you mentioned at the top of this 30-minute block, which is a paper drill, is when we just puke vision all over the map and we don't help people see themselves in that equation, in that vision of a greater future.
Yeah, I think that's it. We started off, and the question was about vision, but it ends up maybe being a conversation about motivation. Because to go back to the very beginning, what is it that you're hoping this vision statement to do for you? Is it to provide the senior leadership with clear direction, to keep them on course and be that bit of a North Star? But what about for the rest of the team? And I think for in most cases, maybe not all, it's we want people to be motivated. We want people to be on the balls of their feet. We want them to use good judgment, to put forth the effort that you talked about. And that motivation is really only unlocked when we come to the table and we let people know, here's what we need from you. Here's how your contribution moves us closer to the vision. And here's how that contribution and that achievement is going to benefit you. Because a lot of people do a lot of things for unselfish reasons, but by and large, in the workplace, if you're going to be there for a long time, every day, we do want to know what this means for us. And it's not always monetary, but people want to know. I mean, you and I worked in the nonprofit space for a long time. There are tons of things that people are wanting to get out of the work besides just money. Sometimes they
That's
want
right.
recognition. Sometimes they want professional development. Sometimes they want that fulfillment that they get from working on something that they care about. But we need to understand what that is in our people because no two people are exactly the same. And so the hard work, I think, of the leader, if we want to get that kind of ownership, which kind of unlocks the motivation, is to spend the time with our people, have conversations with them, observe them. People, by the way, people are not great about just knowing off the top of their head what it is they want or what it is they like. We're
Totally.
notoriously bad at that as humans. So it might be multiple conversations. It might be a combination of observing them and talking to them. And maybe we use some of these tools we can pull off the shelf to get an idea of what motivates them, what their work style is, etc. But the better we know our people and the more engaged we are in that conversation, the better chance we have of appealing to what it is they really need from the role and from the job. And when we can get that married up, then we've got a real chance at having motivated people.
Yeah. I love how you said appealing to them because it's so interesting because when you think about vision, it appeals to that sense of greatness when it's an appealing vision,
Right.
right? Like, a free climbing, frankly, any rock wall is completely unappealing to me. Going back to that illustration. So we want to try and appeal to their interests. We want to try to help them see that. I love that. What do you think about the aspect of short term, long term? How do we kind of disaggregate that and chunk that down?
Yeah. I don't want to say that those terms are kind of arbitrary, but I think again, you've got to be pretty specific in what you mean. I guess at first blush, I think of the word vision as being a bit longer term. It's a vision, it's an aspirational picture of that better future, which I think implies that it's going to take some time and that it's going to be more of a general direction we're moving toward it rather than like kind of specific stepping stones along the way. I don't know that a short-term vision even really, it feels a little oxymoronic to me, but
Yeah, it does, doesn't
I,
it?
I can think about it a bit more, but I think that probably is more of an objective, maybe a goal.
Yeah.
But vision, I tend to think is like something that we may or may not even achieve in the next 5 or 10 years. It may be something that we don't achieve in our lifetime, but it's something that's worth fighting for and worth working for. Something we believe in enough to stay with it, even if it's kind of far out on the horizon.
Yeah, that's the old, um uh, Hebrew adage about the old man who is planting trees, and very old, very elderly man planting trees, and someone in that local village says, "What are you doing? Why are you planting these trees? Clear, surely you will never be able to eat of the fruit of them." And he looked back at them and says, "Yes, but surely others can." That's that, something worth fighting for, something worth working toward, that we may never fully see the fruits that may actually emerge from that. I mean, at least not this side of eternity.
Yeah,
And
it's the old
yet,
third. Go ahead.
it's still worthy of my efforts day to day to keep putting that money in the bank, to compound all of that, to plant those trees, to keep going, whereas, uh, you know, I think you're right. We talk about words as is very different from a goal or an objective, right? Like, goals and objectives are very much in line with that, 20-mile march kind of idea, which we did a lot of this when we were at Team Red, White, and Blue. Had an opportunity. We had the opportunity to sit down with Jim Collins and really talk about this, because I think when we are talking about more near term, we're talking about nested goals and objectives on the march to that vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the reference to the tree. And just to put it kind of in a business context, I think one of the things that all of us need to make some peace with is that we will likely plant and tend orchards that we never get to enjoy the fruit of in our professional career. And I think that is a good thing. I think we should be striving to do that. And I think too often we feel like, well, what's the point of doing this? If I'm not going to get credit for it or get rewarded for it, or whatever the case may be. I know that you've been involved in efforts, and I know that I have, where I can see, my fingerprints on something that doesn't fully materialize until after I've left the
Yeah.
organization. And I take a great deal of satisfaction in that. And I usually say nothing to anybody because it's for me. It's not for anybody else. I feel no need to go around saying, I actually started that initiative, or, I had a hand in that back in the day. And sometimes people who love me and care about me, like my wife, Jenny, will say, man, aren't you upset that, this is going on and like there's no mention of your name? And I'm like, no, I'm not. And I'm not trying to be like the bigger person here. This is just how I am, because I get genuinely satisfied to see something that I cared about come to fruition, even though I'm not directly involved anymore. And I think we should all try our best to feel that way, because it has never harmed me, Brandon. I have never been harmed by other people having success in my absence. It's,
Yeah.
it's never taken anything away from me. It's never pulled any money out of my pocket. It's never harmed my reputation. Projects, initiatives, companies that I've been involved with in the past,
Yeah.
doing great things after I've left. Uh, you know, all credit to the people who were there making it happen, by the way. It's never harmed me a single time. I can tell you, though, it actually has benefited me. Maybe not directly, maybe not monetarily, but not only do I get that fulfillment and the confidence of knowing, but people are smart. You develop a reputation over time, and people see the projects you've been involved in, and you know, it carries a lot of water. So I just think that's something to keep in mind as well, is to remember that some of these things are far beyond our direct benefit, but there's still a lot of goodness there, and I just don't see how it can hurt.
Yeah. I think where it hurts is when there's a diminishment of contribution towards achieving that vision, or towards achieving some of the objectives and goals. And so I want to throw that out there in the conversation as well, because I think you're 100% right in the end of the day. Like, both of us have been involved in endeavors where, we've seen some of those fruits come, more to fruition on the back end of that. I also don't want to discount the fact that at times I know I can only speak for myself. I have felt at times diminished, or the efforts diminished. And I think that that's just sometimes things get sideways, and it's just kind of the way it is. But I just wanted to throw that out there because I do think that it's fair to say that there might be some folks who, when they hear that, could say, I could totally appreciate that. I appreciate, I think what you're doing, Blaine, is you're calling us to our better angels. And I think that that's right. And I think that that is good. And I think that we have to be very cautious as leaders to make sure that people, regardless of where they're at in the process, see themselves within the team, the effort, the win, the accomplishment. And I think that we can do our best to actively try and encourage that and hope that it's received, because we also I think a lot about in this conversation the parable of the sower, which is one of my favorite parables in the Bible, where basically Jesus just keeps talking about, just throw the seeds. You got to throw the seeds out there, throw the seeds. The ground that they land upon, that's not up to you. Some of the ground could be soft and fertile, some could be rocky, some could be hard. It's just the way it is, right? But what we need to think about is throwing those seeds, casting the vision, including others, helping people see themselves within that vision, and then consistently throwing those seeds of goodness to invite them to be a active owner and participant in creating the reality that we are striving toward.
Yeah, I'll give you one more example here as we wrap up. West Point's mission, and forgive me, my fellow graduates, I won't get it word for word, but it's to educate, train, and inspire leaders to a lifetime of service to the nation. And that is a great mission. It's a wonderful vision that they've cast there, and they do a wonderful job of it.
Hmm.
And when you think about it in more granular terms, though, a lot of graduates do 5 years. They do their 5-year active duty commitment and they get out and they go on to do other things. Some stay in and become brigade commanders or general officers and, wear stars on their shoulders. And I don't think the good folks at West Point over all these years are cursing the people who got out in 5 years and didn't stay in the Army, but went on to be, Bob
Yep.
McDonald, who was the CEO of Procter and Gamble and the Secretary
Sec
of the
VA.
VA, right?
Absolutely.
Lifetime of service to the nation. And so that's something maybe just to keep in mind, both for us as people who have contributed to something that maybe just, you don't know how it's going to turn out, but your job, as you
Yeah.
said, is to plant the seed, to educate, train, and inspire in this case, but also uh, as the individual who's going to take that particular path. We don't ever really know what we're inspiring people to exactly, but I think casting the vision provides an opportunity, as you said at the very beginning, to appeal to someone's sense of greatness, maybe to appeal to their better angels in this case, and to get the very best out of them for whatever time, duration, and mission they happen to be on. And I just don't see a downside in doing that. So I guess at the end
Yeah.
of the day, Tim, I'm pro vision. I think it's worth your time and effort to do it right. That's where I come out 28 minutes later.
I love that. I really love that you brought it back to West Point as well, because surely Bob McDonald, while he was a cadet, had no clue or intention to become the Sec VA. And yet that's what he did, because he continued his service to his nation. So an investment well placed, a vision well cast. And so with that, I think we can close the book on this one. Tim, thank you for your question. Anybody that has any questions that you'd like to hear us chop up, please send them to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com, and we would just be overjoyed to chop it up for a little bit. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us today.